Good afternoon, dear audience. It's a privilege and it's a pleasure to be here. I'm speaking in English because now I'm going to present our next two keynote speakers who come from Germany and Finland. And I would like to tell you a little bit a story and why we invited some wonderful counterparts that will present and share their vision about the changing world that we have today. FI's mission actually is to improve the quality of management through the exchange of experiences, ideas, knowledge. And we develop every month a get-together of our counterparts all around the world. We have participants from Europe, from the Americas, Canada, to Africa, Middle East, and even Asia. We have participants from Japan. And we discuss the social, economic, political, and even environmental issues of each country. So when we are talking about a changing world, we cannot think only about our frontiers and what happens in Portugal. It's a pleasure to have two visions from Germany and Finland.
Well,
so maybe, okay, I think.
No, I can tell you a bit about myself.
Okay, and I'll wait here so that I can ask you something in case.
I'm here right now. So, yeah, I'm an economist, and we're the German Economic Institute, which is the largest private economic research institute in Germany, focusing on everything which is relevant for economic policy. And yeah, we are glad to counterpart with you in this group, and I'm very glad to be here and tell you a bit about my perspective on international developments and their economic consequences.
Thank you. The stage is yours.
Thank you very much. So we've heard a lot about change today, and combining the first session and this one, my impression is that the C and C-suites may stand for change right now, as companies have to reinvent themselves, as political developments require adaptation, permanent adaptation, and that as there's a new set of uncertainty. In general, people don't like change. Change is stress, change is work, change is inconvenience, stress brings cost, and the benefits are maybe not as visible in the moment. Going back a couple of years, there has been a time when change was something positive, or at least was seen as a promise. Well, maybe not by everyone, but at least in the Obama years. That's a poster from the first Obama campaign in, meanwhile, 15 years ago. Change was his big promise and his big slogan. And we've all seen that the backslash came 8 years later when Donald Trump has been elected, and everything, all those who didn't want change, who wanted to come back in a world they knew and they maybe experienced as something positive, gain power. So today, when we are talking about change and necessity to change, it's not a promise. It's an effort, and it's a lot of challenges. We're talking about climate change. We're talking about the conflict of systems or competition of systems. We're talking about more and more authoritarian systems in the world. So strongmen gaining power. China not only being a strong economic competitor, but also being basically a dictatorship. And that's the first time, maybe the first time for at least a long period of time, where the promise of prosperity from the democracies, which was very attractive in the Cold War, is not a monopoly anymore. So China also has its promise of prosperity for its people and other countries as well. We have the war in Ukraine, we have the war in the Middle East. We don't know what the US will bring and what the next American elections in less than 1 year will bring and what it means in the end for Europe. So having a new president who is not that committed to the transatlantic cooperation and military aid and so on can bring enormous pressure on us. We are talking about resource risk, we are talking about deglobalization, energy price crisis, unstable supply chains in the last couple of years, rising protectionism, cyber risk. Right now in a little north of KÖLN, about 70 communities are off grid or off the internet because they've been cyber attacked and can't provide their services anymore. So many challenges. When we structure them at the Institute, we defined 4D as main disruptors. It's decarbonization, obviously. It's digitization. Both things companies more or less can work with. It's demographic change that has been mentioned earlier on the in the panel discussion. To just give you an impression how big demographic change in Germany will be over the next 20 years. We will lose about 400,000 to 500,000 people in working age each year for 20 years. So we'll lose our working age, our population in the working age will shrink by the size of Portugal in 2 decades. And that's a lot. And that's not only Germany. That's many European countries. It's not that much in the US. They are still growing because of immigration. It's even worse in China, by the way. And that maybe their working age population will cut in half in a couple of decades. So that could be one reason for China to approach their targets earlier. And the last one, the 4th D, I just mentioned 3. The 4th D is, we've called it deglobalization, and that's what I would like to talk about a bit. But first of all these influences, all these events lead to an increase of uncertainty. That's an index of political uncertainty, which is the higher line. The top line is Germany. Well, the most fluctuating one. US is much more stable, but we see that in most parts of the world, of the Western world, the level of uncertainty has increased year by year. Everyone shocked by 9/11. Then there was a financial crisis, the sovereign debt crisis, especially in Europe or the southern part of Europe. The Trump years, COVID, and now the Ukraine war. And all these are, or most of these are political crisis, political uncertainties. And for companies, it's much easier to handle financial risk and market risk and so on, and not political risks. So I'd like to stress that companies have to have a close look in what's happening in the political sphere and to develop strategies to cope with the risks that are out there and that may influence or probably will influence their business. Deglobalization can already be measured. I've brought an index here, which is the relation between global trade or development of global trade, growth of global trade, and growth of the global economy. If the number is larger than 1, so if the bar is higher than the 1.0 line, then global trade grows quicker than the global economy. And that means that's globalization. That's more interaction between the countries, that's more trade, it's more interconnection. And we've seen that globalization really took place in the 1990s and a little less in the early 2000s. But so there was a breakdown in 2019 and then back in 2020. But basically, since the financial crisis, the growth of globalization has come to a stop. It's not a deglobalization yet. we don't see a disintegration of supply chains yet, but especially in the next years, as all projections, what all projections show, is that global trade will grow like the global economy. So there's no progress in globalization anymore. And globalization was an important driver of prosperity for our countries as well, because that led to innovation, it led to better division of labor. It has already been mentioned that Asia, and especially China, has caught up. And that's not the GDP shares, it's the shares of world trade. So it's can be interpreted as well, let's say maybe world market shares, something like that, but shares of exports. And we see that the US share declined in the early 2000s and is pretty stable since then, increasing a bit in the last years, while Europe had its peak in the early 2000s and declined significantly until the financial crisis or the sovereign debt crisis, and is pretty stable, declining in the last years since then. And Asia, and that's especially China, of course, is growing. So if we see that competition, we see that Asia, that China in particular, has become an important competitor, and not only in terms of the economy, but with that in terms of policy, it's a political competition as well, and it's a competition of values that we see. So is Europe fit for that competition? And I mean, one of the big programs in Europe is Fit for 55. I renamed it in Fit for 25. So are we fit for these challenges that are right ahead of us? Looking at trade policy, it's hard to understand why it's so difficult to come to agreements, free trade agreements with Mercosur. And it's even more unbelievable that that the negotiations with Australia did fail, or at least have been stalled for an uncertain period of time. If we are looking for trade partners, and if we are looking for stable and reliable value chains, especially in the if you're looking at who has the natural resources, then Australia is. I mean, they're so Western. They're so much like we are. So if we are not able to come to an agreement with Australia, with whom can we increase our trade? Are we attractive? Is Europe attractive to investors? What about the common digital market? We're talking about digitization. I did mention it in the beginning, but the big advantage of Europe is its common market, but it's a traditional goods market. It's limited in services, but it's still fragmented when it comes to the digital market. I don't want to talk about joint foreign policy, which definitely would be helpful and necessary in that big power competition, but that's far from reality. And if we are able to defend ourselves as European, I mean, everyone can think about that. Are we really advanced in IT and AI, looking at the things which are extremely relevant for economic prosperity in the future? Well, partly we are, but just partly, and just in small parts, unfortunately. And that's not too much China as well. It's well China, but here the main competitor is the US. So, for example, for the German automotive industry, China is relevant in terms of electrification, as a competitor in terms of electrification. And my impression is that German automakers are able to compete on their technology, at least in the premium market segment. But competing with Google and the others and Apple and so on, in digitalization of that product is much more difficult, and the result could be that we may build cars, but have to pay a lot of money for each car to the provider of the technology. So having advanced, being competitive in that new technologies is extremely important. And that's all not new. We all know, and Europe knows, that it must strengthen its competitiveness. I quote the Lisbon strategy from 2000. So the aim was to be the most competitive and dynamic knowledge-based economy in the world. I don't think we really are. We could write that again and again and again in documents, but unfortunately we are a bit too far from that. We must see that Europe is, well, it's just one player and probably not the most important player in the world. When we are talking about competition between, it's true and it's sure that Europe and China will be part of that competition, but what's the role of the European Union? What's the role of Europe? In terms of GDP, we are behind Europe as a bloc is behind North America as a bloc, USMCA, the new agreement between the US, Mexico, and Canada, formerly known as NAFTA, and RCEP, so not China only, but the Asian counterpart, or the Asian bloc. We are better in carbon emissions, but we are falling behind in trade, we are falling behind in GDP, and we have a short-term demographic problems. That's the data for Germany, US, and China in that case. So we are getting much older and are already older than others. So our prospect from well, let's say these macroeconomic perspectives is not the best. In terms of policies, what has been done, and the Inflation Reduction Act has already been mentioned. The US is indeed looking at a phase of reindustrialization, and we fear a phase of deindustrialization. Reindustrialization of the US has been talked about for 15 years now, since the shale gas revolution, and not a lot happens then. But nowadays, the price differences are so high and permanent that energy-intensive industries move from Europe to the US, and the Inflation Reduction Act gave a very good and very helpful for them incentive to reindustrialize. The industry in the US is on a pretty low level, so there's a long way to go. But that created a dynamic. Even if the money the US has taken, almost, well, you can't really say how much money it is because it's not defined. But estimates are a little less than 400 billion euros. If we compare that to the sheer numbers of what the European Union has provided in the Next Generation EU, that was 750 billion euro. I think almost 800 in today's prices. But that wasn't only fresh money. That wasn't only money invested in attracting industries and providing better conditions for industries investment. And we see that the impulse or the dynamics created by the US is much bigger than what we see in Europe. So it's not only about the money. The US has taken a lot of money, Europe has taken a lot of money. It's about the structural differences and the structural advantages and disadvantages in our economies. Looking at when we're talking about money, looking at what the three blocks, in that case China, US, and Europe, are spending for geopolitical investment programs. That's not developing aid. It's a Silk Road Initiative. China, 600 to 800 billion euros. Build Back Better World, so the external part of that, 700 billion, and the Global Gateway in Europe, 300 billion. So there's additional money, of course, in the in the member states, but I think it still shows that there's a way to go if we want to play with these two big guys. We are in a world which becomes multipolar, or in a world order that has been becoming much more complex, and we've heard a lot about that in the last presentation. Just an indicator, that's the results of the votes on the UN resolution after the Russian assault on Ukraine. We see a lot of countries, North America, Europe, parts of Latin America, Australia, Oceania, parts of Africa voting in favor of that, of criticizing the US, the Russian invasion in Ukraine. And, but we see a lot of countries abstaining. So that's not clear, are we in favor of that, well, or are we defending the old order, the old security order, or are we hiding that a bit, or maybe not knowing better, Russia? So you see China, for example, is abstaining, and on the or has been, and afterwards we've seen close contacts between China and Russia. India, another second largest country in the world, or almost the largest country, and will be the largest country shortly, still is somewhere in between. So benefiting from the low oil prices from Russia, as they're not sanctioning it. What I'm trying to say is that in a complex world where big authoritarian systems are endangering the traditional economic and security order, it's necessary to look where are your friends, and who to cooperate with, and who might be more difficult. I skip that and just go to the last one, as there are very different approaches of the respective countries or blocks how to be present on the international stage from an economic perspective. So the US is using hard power, is using sanctions quite aggressively, is using protectionism also domestically to protect the industry, and has its military power everywhere in the world. China is trying to influence the world through investment, and is supporting authoritarian leaders. Divide et impera. So divide and rule is what's happening there. There's military expansion. There's expansion of or trying to redefine borders in the South Chinese Sea. They're trying to use their influence on the Silk and Roads, on the Belt and Road Initiative countries. So that's what I mean with influence through investments. And as the stronger they are also economically, the more power they have, obviously. And Europe has its normative targets, has its a very normative policy making, focusing still on, and rightfully so, on multilateralism. But that's becoming more and more difficult. And if you don't find your allies in the world, it's difficult to have at least maybe even not multilateral, but plurilateral approaches in diplomacy. So much more on the soft power side. If I look at military expenses, for example, the sheer number is big, but it's so divided in 27 states, and so not united at all to be a visible power in the world. The baseline for that is, or for every kind of power, and also for the ability of Europe to defend its position in the world, but also for the ability to China to expand their influence, is economic prosperity. So, and therefore, security and economic and political environment is a precondition for prosperity, but prosperity is also a precondition for the position of a country or a bloc, or in that case, European Union in the world. Economic power is power as well, even if it's not weaponized, even if we are not talking about sanctions or something like that, or if we are not talking about maintaining technological advantage in order to have a lever in case of a conflict, because it's easier to use economic weapons than real weapons in the end. So that's why the US, for example, has also imposed sanctions on China. But the baseline for all that is a strong economic perspective, or it's a strong economic situation. It's a strong economy. It's a strong and innovative economy. It's technological progress and it's technological competitiveness. And so, talking about a changing world and looking for the role of Europe in that changing world, as an economist, my final words here should be that we need a growth-oriented economic policy. We need innovation systems. We need innovative entrepreneurs and also traditional companies, business leaders in all parts of Europe to provide prosperity to the people who live here, and also to give us a political opportunity to defend our values in the world, because without a strong economy, that probably would not work for very long. So thank you very much. And I'm happy. I don't know if we do a Q&A right now or do it later on, but thanks for your for listening to me.
Would you like to make any questions? We can do the Q&A now and then pass to our keynote speaker of Finland. There are no questions. I think you were very clear with wonderful insights. Thank you so much, Hubertus. Thank you.